decided to start this podcast just to have something to do as a hobby. If I get any followers who happen to enjoy my content or even disagree with it, that's an added benefit. I will be talking mostly about economic issues, maybe some topics on personal finance. The name of the podcast comes from the book Human Action. It was written by Ludwig von Mises. He was one of the preeminent Austrian economists of the 20th century, and I'm sure I'll be referencing his material on a regular basis. The podcast will have a strong libertarian flavor, as I believe it to be a superior approach to markets, finance, and politics. In this first episode, I want to cover the topic of tariffs, since it is a hot button in today's economy. I'm actually going to read a few pages from a book called The Libertarian Mind by David Bose. It gives a good general overview of the case against tariffs. However, there are organizations like the Cato Institute that have done a more detailed economic analysis of, for example, Trump's recent tariffs, and they present hard data which refutes the alleged problem of trade deficits. And I would highly recommend their website if you're looking for a reasoned analysis of tariffs or other economic issues. All right, let's get started. This excerpt is going to be from, I guess, again, as I said, The Libertarian Mind, from the chapter called The Market Process. One of the important applications of the principle of comparative advantage is international trade. To an economist, there's nothing really special about international trade. Individuals make trades when both of them expect to benefit, whether they live across the street, in different states, or in different countries. Since 1776, when Adam Smith demonstrated the benefits of free trade, there has been little intellectual debate on the subject. More than most economic topics, the debate over trade has been spurred by special interests, seeking advantages from government that they could not gain in the marketplace. Whenever two individuals make a trade, both expect to benefit, and both theory and observation tells us that more often than not, both parties do benefit, and the level of wealth in society is enhanced. The division of labor allows people to specialize in what they're best at and to exchange with those who specialize in something else. As Smith wrote, it is the maximum of every prudent family never to attempt to make at home what it will cost more to make than to buy. What is prudence in the conduct of every private family can scarce be folly in that of a great kingdom. That is, it's usually best to sell where you can get the highest price and buy where you can get the lowest price. But somehow the drawing of national boundaries confuses people's thinking on the benefits of trade. Maybe it's because balance of trade statistics are calculated on a national basis. We could just as well calculate the balance of trade between New York and New Jersey, or between Massachusetts and California. For that matter, you could calculate your own balance of trade between yourself and everyone you deal with. If I did that, I would have a huge trade deficit with my grocer, my dentist, and my department store, because I buy a great deal from them, and they never buy anything from me. My only trade surpluses would be with my employer and the publisher of this book, because I buy almost nothing from them. What would be the sense of such calculations? I expected to benefit from each transaction, and the only balance I care about is that my income exceed my expenditures. The best way to make that happen is to concentrate on doing what I do best and let others do what they do best. The very notion of a balance of trade is misguided. Trade has to balance, just as an individual cannot long consume more than he produces, except if he's a thief or a beneficiary of gifts, charity, or government transfer payments. All the individuals in a country cannot consume more than they produce or import more than they export. As pleasant as it would be to imagine, Producers in other countries will not give us their products for free or in return for dollars that are never exchanged for our goods and services. A national balance of trade is just a composite of all the trades made by individuals in the nation. If each of those trades makes economic sense, the aggregate cannot be a problem. Frederick Bastiat pointed out that a nation could improve its balance of trade by loading a ship with exports, recording the departure of the ship, and then sinking it outside the country's territorial waters. Goods were exported, none were import, and the balance of trade is favorable. Clearly, that would not be a sensible policy. The real problem may be a fundamental economic mistake regarding exports as good and imports as bad. We see this fallacy in every discussion of trade negotiations. Journalists always report that the United States gave up some of its restrictions on imports in return for similar concessions from other countries. But we're not giving up anything when the U.S. government lets American consumers buy from foreign suppliers. The point of economic activity is consumption. We produce in order that we may consume. We sell in order to buy. And we export to pay for our imports. For each participant in international trade, the goal is to acquire consumption goods as cheaply as possible. The benefit of trade is the import, the cost is the export. Politicians just don't seem to get this. Former President Obama's official statement on promoting U.S. jobs by increasing trade and exports mentions exports more than 40 times, imports not once. His Republican critics agree. Former Senator Rob Portman said that a trade agreement is vital to increasing American exports. More colorfully, during his 1996 presidential campaign, Pat Buchanan stood at the port of Baltimore and said, "This harbor in Baltimore is one of the biggest and busiest in the nation. There needs to be more American goods going out." Such rhetoric has become even more commonplace in recent years. That's fundamentally mistaken. We don't want to send any more of our wealth overseas than we have to in order to acquire goods from overseas. If Saudi Arabia would give us oil for free, or if South Korea would give us televisions for free, Americans would be better off. The people and capital that used to produce televisions or used to produce things that were traded for televisions could then shift to producing other goods. Unfortunately for us, we don't get those goods from other countries for free. But if we can get them cheaper than it would cost us to produce them ourselves, we're better off. Sometimes international trade is seen in terms of competition between nations. We should view it instead, like domestic trade, as a form of cooperation. By trading, people in both countries can prosper, and we should remember that goods are produced by individuals and businesses, not by nation-states. South Korea doesn't produce televisions. The United States doesn't produce the world's most popular entertainment. Individuals organized into partnerships and corporations in each country produce and exchange. In any case, today's economy is so globally integrated that it's not clear even what a Japanese or a Dutch company is. If Apple produces iPads in China and sells them in Europe, which country is racking up points on the international scoreboard? The immediate winners would seem to be investors and engineers in the United States, workers in China, and consumers in Europe. But of course, the broader benefits of international trade will accrue to investors, workers, and consumers in all those areas. The benefit of international trade to consumers is clear. We can buy goods produced in other countries if we find them better or cheaper. There are other benefits as well. First, it allows the division of labor to work on a broader scale, enabling the people in each country to produce the goods at which they have a comparative advantage. As Mises put it, the inhabitants of Switzerland preferred manufacture watches instead of growing wheat. Watchmaking is for them the cheapest way to acquire wheat. On the other hand, the growing of wheat is the cheapest way for the Canadian farmer to acquire watches. A great advantage of the price system is that it gives us one standard by which to determine what goods any of us should produce. Should we produce coffee, corn, insurance, computer software, movies, or flange making machines? The answer is whichever one will give us the greatest profit. The economist Michael Boskin of Stanford University got in hot water when he was a top presidential economic advisor for reportedly saying something that was absolutely true. $1's worth of potato chips is worth just as much as $1's worth of computer chips, and it doesn't matter which one you produce. A country as technologically advanced as the United States is going to produce a lot of high-tech products, though in many cases we produce the designs here, which is where we get the most profit, and then have the actual computer chips, televisions, and so on produced where the production wages are cheaper. Look at the back of your iPhone or iPad. You'll probably find the words designed by Apple in California, assembled in China. We also seem to have a huge comparative advantage in producing popular culture, movies, television, music, computer games, and so on. And despite our cutting-edge technology, we have vast amounts of rich farmland and highly productive farmers. So we also produce many agricultural products more cheaply than anyone else. Contrary to mercantilist notions, a number of economies have prospered through the export mainly of relatively unprocessed materials, such as timber, meat, grain, wool, and minerals. Just think of Canada, the United States, Australia, and New Zealand. Others have prospered as traders and manufacturers, despite a decided lack of natural resources. Think of Holland, Switzerland, Britain, Japan, and Hong Kong. The key is free markets, not specific resources or products. Remember, it's not necessary that every country have an absolute advantage at producing something. It will always have a comparative advantage in something. Even if Vera Wang is the best typist in her company, she's still going to design clothes and hire someone else to type. Even if Americans can produce every conceivable product more cheaply than Mexicans, both countries will still gain from trading because Mexican firms will make the goods they are relatively, even if not absolutely, more efficient at producing. International trade also makes possible economies of scale, that is, the efficiencies that companies can achieve by producing in large quantities, which couldn't be achieved in smaller national economies. That's less important for American companies, which already have the world's largest market, than for companies in Switzerland, Hong Kong, Taiwan, and other small nations. But even American companies, especially if they produce something for a narrow market, can reduce their unit costs by selling internationally. Freer international trade is an important competitive spur to domestic companies. American cars are better than they were a generation ago because of the competition from Japanese and other foreign companies. American steel firms were forced to become more efficient in the face of foreign competition, and American semiconductor manufacturers became more efficient and shifted their efforts toward higher value chips. These days, even the concepts of imports and exports may be outmoded. The components of an iPhone are produced in countries around the world by companies headquartered across the globe, and the product is available virtually everywhere on Earth. When governments restrict international trade at the behest of domestic interest groups, they impede the information and coordination process of the market. They protect some industries and jobs, but only at the expense of the whole economy. Protectionism prevents capital and labor from moving to uses that would better satisfy consumer demand. Like labor-saving machinery, imports reduce employment in one part of the economy, allowing those workers to move to more productive jobs. The 19th century economist Henry George pointed out in Protection or Free Trade that nations try to embargo their enemies to restrict their foreign trade in time of war, which is much like protectionism. Blockading squadrons are a means whereby nations seek to prevent their enemies from trading. Protective tariffs are a means whereby nations attempt to prevent their own people from trading. What protectionism teaches us is to do to ourselves in time of peace what enemies seek to do to us in time of war. Finally, a great benefit of international trade is to reduce the chances of war. 19th century liberals said, "When goods cannot cross borders, armies will. Trade creates people on both sides of national borders with an interest in peace and increases international contacts and understanding." That doesn't mean there will never be a war between countries practicing free trade, but commercial relations do seem to improve the prospects for peace. So, I think that was a pretty good overview of tariffs, protectionism, trade balances. I guess I'll wrap up my first podcast there. If anybody views this and would like to make comments, feel free to do so. And thank you for listening.